This is the calling of St. Matthew. It was completed in 1600. The main subjects in this piece are Jesus, Matthew, and Peter. If we look at the setting, we see that it looks like a bar or a basement type of environment. This is very different from where we usually see Jesus depicted, but Caravaggio intentionally picked this contemporary setting in order to highlight his message that the power of Christ can reach every situation of life. Caravaggio chooses to depict a moment of conversion. Matthew is receiving spiritual awakening. Matthew is surrounded by other tax collectors who all seem to be counting money that has been gotten illegally. Light is coming in from the upper right of the painting, and the group of tax collectors are the focus of this light. The halo over the head of Jesus is the only sign of his divinity. Jesus' pointed right hand calls on St. Matthew to join him and leave his sinful life behind. The man pointing to himself in disbelief, widely believed to be St. Matthew, is questioning whether Jesus is pointing to him. He is surprised that Jesus would pick someone like him, who was seen as a sinner and judged by many people. If we look at the subjects in this painting, we notice that there are many contrasting details. We see that Christ looks more noble and younger and delicate, unlike Matthew. Furthermore, the tax collectors at the table follow the fashion of the early 17th century. They are depicted in fancy and expensive clothing. This is different from what Jesus and Peter are wearing. They are clothed in tunics that communicate poverty, and they are dressed in dull colors and do not have any shoes on. Caravaggio purposely contrasts the styles of the tax collectors with Jesus and Peter to emphasize his message. So, the people around the table are following the way of the world or the flesh. They do what the world think is right without any regard for the Lord. This is shown by them wearing fashion that was popular during that time period. Peter, on the other hand, follows Jesus and therefore dresses like him. Peter is ignoring the worldly guidelines and goes by what Jesus says. The relationship between the flesh and the spirit is explained in Romans 8:6. For to set the mind on the flesh is death, but to set the mind on the spirit is life and peace. This verse details exactly what Jesus is calling St. Matthew to do. Caravaggio combines many different details in order to appeal to his audience. I believe that Caravaggio's audience is one of unbelievers. He is showing those that may believe that they are too unholy or too sinful that anyone is able to follow Christ. He purposely uses this so that his audience can relate to St. Matthew. Caravaggio is focusing on the conversion from Levi, which was St. Matthew's name before he had the conversion, to St. Matthew. He does not choose to show Matthew after his conversion because the audience would not be able to identify with him. He shows Matthew when he was at a low point, but he is still going to follow Christ. Caravaggio brings the spiritual to an everyday level. This painting is from the Baroque period. It takes a spiritual form from the Renaissance period and maintains naturalism. The Baroque builds on the Renaissance periods and puts it in an environment where it is accessible. Caravaggio also intentionally picks a dark and shady environment. This is different from where most paintings with religious connotations, but he purposely does this so that the audience can see that it is not so out of reach to follow Jesus. Caravaggio is known for capturing the climactic instant on canvas. Caravaggio became popular by freezing the most dramatic moment with his brush. There are numerous examples of this seen in his paintings. For example, this is a conversion of St. Matthew. In this painting, Caravaggio depicts Saul at the exact moment of conversion. Saul is lying on the ground with his arms open and bathed in light. Another painting where Caravaggio seizes the culminating moment is Judith and Holofernes. This painting immediately pulls readers into the midst of a beheading. In the Arrest of Christ, Jesus is kissing the Lord, showing the climactic moment before Jesus is taken. This is a recurring theme in Caravaggio's works. In The Sacrifice of Isaac, Caravaggio freezes the moment when Abraham's knife is at Isaac's throat and the angel intervenes by calling to him. Caravaggio took full advantage of the potential for drama in this scene. All these works bring the viewer to the breathtaking climactic moment of the scene. In The Calling of St. Matthew, Jesus is pointing to St. Matthew with a bent hand. This bent hand may be a replica of the hand that we see in Michelangelo's Adam Sistine ceiling. It is widely believed that the bent hand is pointing to the bearded figure, but maybe it's not. Maybe it is actually pointing at something else. Maybe we thought Matthew was the wrong person all along. Most people look at the bearded man and assume he is St. Matthew because he's pointing back at himself. But maybe he's pointing at the man sitting beside him. He could be questioning Jesus and saying, "Are you really picking this sinner to follow you?" Since showing the climactic moment is Caravaggio's trademark, it seems unlikely that in his first public commission he would use dramatic light and grand gesture for an event that hasn't happened yet. St. Matthew could possibly be the man seated at the far end of the table with his head bowed, intent on gathering money. If this were the case, it would fall more in line with a theme that is present in many of Caravaggio's works. By showing the moment right before Matthew was converted, Caravaggio would be showing the most climactic moment. The Matthew with his head bowed in this painting is still mirrored in his sinful ways, and the light shining on top of his head is gesturing the future evangelist at any moment to lift his eyes and follow Christ. In 1621, Hendrik Terboven repeated the subjects of Caravaggio and made the Calling of St. Matthew. He spent 10 years in Italy as a young man, and he probably met Caravaggio, who had a great influence on him. The figures in Terboven's piece are half-length and not full-length like in Caravaggio's. The medium is oil on canvas in both pieces. In Caravaggio's piece, there is a large empty space between Jesus and St. Matthew, but this is not present in Terboven's piece. In addition, the composition has been reversed. Christ and Peter are on the left, while the tax collectors are in the foreground. The light present in this piece is also more atmospheric than Caravaggio's. No matter which piece you may like the best, no one can ignore the influence that Caravaggio's piece had on Terboven's. The original Calling of St. Matthew incorporates many details that are used to underline the message and the audience. The message may be slightly different based on who you believe Caravaggio intended St. Matthew to be. So the final question has to be, which figure do you believe is St. Matthew?